that where it needs to be. Hopefully it's there.
House Minority Leader,
please.
Democratic Congressman Hakeem Jeffries of New York. Leader Jeffries, thanks for being with us this morning. So there is a continuing resolution that was passed through the House thanks to a whole bunch of Democratic votes. The government will, in fact, be funded at least for a few more months. Tell us about your support of this bill, why you thought it was important to get on board and work with Speaker Johnson, at least in this case.
Well, good morning. Great to be back with you. From the very beginning of this Congress, Democrats have maintained that we are ready, willing, and able to find bipartisan common ground on any issue for the good of the American people. And we've repeatedly done just that. We've done it in the context of now avoiding 2 government shutdowns. We've done it in the context of securing $16 billion in disaster assistance for the American people. We've done it in the context of avoiding a catastrophic default on our nation's debt that would have crashed the economy and triggered a job-killing recession. And so this has been the pattern that House Democrats will continue to follow for the American people. We've said...
If that ain't misleading, I don't know what is. I mean, you know, theoretically speaking, yeah, they're right. They prevented for a collapse. But still, they're not addressing the main issue in regards towards, first of all, who got this thing in the mess that it's in, and secondly, what are we going to actually do to get us out of it, rather than just kick the can down the road and continue to keep putting a Band-Aid on top of another Band-Aid that basically is going to put such of a burden upon to the younger generation. You know, I was just talking to a Verizon contractor last night over in Dresden, Tennessee, and explaining to him about all this stuff pertaining to the money situation monetarily. And he looked at me, he said, I agree. He said, we should have this all figured out and have it to where it's not going to be such of a burden upon the next generation. And I looked at him and I said, okay, you're a phone expert. I said, you're familiar with all this digital data stuff out there in the communities pertaining to the phone. I go, can you imagine what our children and our children's children and possibly their grandchildren, providing that the world lasts that long, what they're going to accuse us of towards bringing this into an existence, and nobody was willing to stop it or put side rails on it or govern it in some sort of way. And then I thought last night, as I was always doing a lot of thinking, you know, what exactly is a shepherd? What is the shepherd's job in shepherding the sheep? It is not only to tell the sheep in ongoing affairs that could possibly ruin their lives pertaining to divorces and whatever, but the shepherd's job is also kind of like the government in governing people. Once they identify that something has come into an existence that needs to be either resolved, taken care of, modified, or even done away with, then is whenever the preachers, those are supposed to be the shepherds, are supposed to speak out against these entities that are going to bring that much more misery to the children of God. This is the area that I continue to, I guess the right word would be harp upon, preach upon, is that throughout the past 25 or 30 years, everybody and their brother has let their guard down in not caring towards what comes into an existence and what doesn't. I remember whenever I was just a young child, probably no older than about 7 or 8, Dan Simmons was going to put a beer joint down here, and the certain members of the community didn't like it, which I don't blame them. They should have done what they done, and they basically got a petition up towards getting everybody to sign the petition. I don't know why that petition didn't stop that beer joint from opening up. I think it was already open. They was trying to shut it down and trying to reopen it or something like that. I don't know all the details about it. I just know this, that at least the incentive went out towards trying to stop a beer joint from popping up right down from the church. Today, I don't even think the Christians even resist anything like that. Now, yesterday, they done a really, really good thing, I thought, by going to the White House and demonstrating their concerns about the war going on over right now in the Holy Land. And the way I understand it, that there was probably more that was for Jerusalem than there was for the Pakistanians. The bottom line is this: any life, no matter what life, that gets taken, especially gets taken illegitimately, should not have happened, should not have occurred. And I continue to keep harping on this matter too as well, is that ever since I have stood out into the eyes of the general public, it seems like America and the world has gone in the very opposite direction towards peace and utopia. It's like they're trying to prove a point. That way they can shake their fist in the face of God and say, see what we've done, see what we've done. We've brought destruction to ourselves, in a bragging type form, which is absolutely sick, to think that somebody could have listened to somebody that could have put the brakes on where we are now. Somebody like Al Gore or somebody like myself, and there's lots of other activists out there that are against what we're doing to our planet, but they didn't listen. It fits under the same category of the group of people that wouldn't listen to Sodom and Gomorrah, because there was the word that went out towards repent and change from your wicked and deceitful ways. There was a message that went out before God destroyed the old world pertaining to the great flood. But once more, it wasn't listened to. And I guess society is so moonstrucken that they're going to make the same mistakes as the generations before them, which to me is absolutely appalling. It is absolutely 100% appalling whenever we cannot learn from our mistakes to the degree that lessons will be repeated until learned. Now, I realize that there's different types of courageousness in the world. There's courageousness pertaining to a little girl or a little boy fighting cancer, or an old man or an old woman having to fight cancer and going and getting radiation treatments and not knowing what it's going to do to their system towards breaking it down and making it even worse. There's all kinds of different courageous people out in the world that has to do things not because they want to do them, but because they feel like it's necessary to do them. And one of those things is our armed forces. Our armed forces don't want to go to war. We don't want to go to war. That wasn't the primary purpose for us inventing the Army and the Navy and the Marines and the Air Force and the Coast Guard and all the other branches of government. Those things was put in place to protect we the people, to govern we the people. And these are areas that the governorship has failed in, not only monetarily, but also seeing all these things that was coming into our lives, and nobody but myself, I guess, was willing to raise a red flag to it, towards it being an oxymoron, towards it basically being bittersweet, towards it basically being the Trojan horse. There's so many good things about social media, artificial intelligence, but there's so many bad things about social media. You know, they just recently, I think, have finalized a strike pertaining to them finally coming to some kind of an agreement. I believe that's right. I may be wrong about that too. But I even got to looking at the fact where people can go online with YouTube and basically see any type or kind of porn that they ever thought about wanting to see. Well, you know, one of the industries that's affected, your peep show industries, pertaining to those that's out there selling DVDs and Playboy and Hustler books and stuff like that. Why does somebody want to pay to go get a book whenever you can get something that's almost identically to being real towards watching a video and hearing all the groans and moans going on while they're having open sex versus a steel page? So there's so many different areas, and I'm not saying that I support Hugh Hefner or Hustler or any of those other books, because whenever my brother died in 2017, the first thing I done was started going through their possessions out here, because nobody else was alive to do it. I was the last sibling, basically the last Mohegan standing. And as I was going through so much stuff, I probably went through, I know, over 150 Playboy and Hustler books that went all the way back to the 70s and the 80s. What did I do with them? I burn them. Every stinking one of them. I burn them. Now, I've told people this story. I think this is the first time that I've told it online where it gets recorded this way. But I've told people that story, and you know what most of them's reflection point is? My God, why in the world did you burn them? Some of them books you could have sold and probably got $150 to $200 a book for, or maybe more than that, depending upon what book it was. You know what my answer to that was? First of all, I don't care about making money that way. That's like a drug dealer or somebody out here doing things illegal that they know that they shouldn't be doing, but they do it anyway. Instead of them being part of the solution to the problem, they're actually part of the problem. But why do I want it hanging on my head, pertaining to putting stumbling blocks out there for other people to stumble over, that's going to cause just as much harm and hurt in their lives, pertaining to adultery, fornication, breaking up relationships, breaking up families, breaking up good marriages? Why do I want to be guilty of that particular same ambition or sin that so many people out there are guilty of? I'm not standing up for the Playboy industry or the Hugh Hefner Hustler industry whatsoever. I'm just saying that there's so many bad things that social media has been a part of that we didn't think it through, or somebody didn't think it through before they ever introduced this to the public, that now the public are wreaking habits over. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that the shepherds that's supposed to be shepherding the sheep have failed their jobs in these areas, in being able to identify what this Trojan horse is now doing and trying to stop it. And if they don't do nothing else but speaking up against it like I do on social media. And I realize a lot of people probably get angry. They probably get PO'd because I speak up about certain things that I speak up about, but I'm actually doing it for the benefit of we the people. Kind of like all the forest fires. You know, I've made mention the reason why the forest fires are the way that they are out west is because you killed all the buffalo. The buffalo not only ate the vegetation, but kept it all stomped down. Well, I've also made mention about burning blankets and also putting sprinkler systems on houses and making it mandatory if you live out into a wooded area to make sure that you have that. Just like if you're in the tornado belt area out in Oklahoma, it's mandatory for you to put up a safe house. That way you can go inside the house and at least save your life. If you can't save all the contents, at least maybe you can save your life. Just like out in places that's prone of getting hit by hurricanes now, it's mandatory to put tornado straps and make things more hurricane proof than what it was 25, 30 years ago. So we're learning, right? We're evolving, we're learning. How come How come, whenever it comes to the responsibility of shepherding the sheep, so many shepherds, which are preachers, evangelists, ministers, whatever, have failed to recognize the dangers with all the red lights blinking? There's not but one explanation for it, and that's the pure mere fact that they was not where they should have been themselves, with God, in God. They was blinded by the devil, and they didn't think that all this was going to have such of a profound effect upon to their sheep. Just like who would have thought that a group of people like Hamas over there in the Middle East would have attacked people and grabbed up their phone and hooked it up with their own Facebook. That way their loved ones, their friends, and everybody else could watch the heinous acts that they was committing on to people, regardless whether it was raping them, cutting their heads off, burning babies, or killing people right there on live Facebook. Who would have ever thought that anybody would have weaponized social media to the degree of doing that? Well, now we know that that's happening. Now we know that that can happen and will happen if there's not safeguards, if there's not some sort of control in controlling what gets out there to the public. Because the more seeds that you plant, it's kind of like that movie of I think it was something Burning of the Bed or something like that. They proven that after that movie was over with, and this was way back in either the late 70s or early 80s whenever that movie come out, that there was actually several people in the nation that actually attempted to do the same act that promoted on that movie towards burning a bed. In other words, killing their husband because their husband was mean to them. Their husband was barbaric. Their husband was abusing them. Their husband wasn't doing this, or their husband was cheating on them, or whatever. The more negativity of seeds that you plant in people's hearts and in their minds, the more force it is to go up against that force. At least the people, certain people in this area, stood up against a tavern being built right down the road here, give or take about a mile, and tried to stop it. At least they tried to stop it. Can we say that about ourselves today?
We're going to put people over politics. We don't just say it, we do it. And so we were able to come together and reach this continuing resolution that did three important things. No spending cuts, no hard right conservative policy changes, no government shutdown.
Leader Jeffries, those are certainly three accomplishments, but what has not been done yet, any aid to Israel or to Ukraine, as well as border security in Taiwan and others. And we're now more than a month from the terror attacks, the October 7th terror attacks in Israel. Congress has still not sent a dime to our allies there. What happens now? Do you have any sense as to when a supplemental may go forth?
In my view, the most likely path forward is for the Senate to continue to do its bipartisan work and find common ground in order to fund Israel, fund Ukraine, fund our allies in the Indo-Pacific, fund the border security requests that President Biden has put forward, and make sure that we are funding humanitarian assistance for Palestinian civilians who are in harm's way in Gaza through no fault of their own, and for civilians in other parts of the world. The Senate has been in negotiation with each other, Senate Democrats and Senate Republicans. It's my hope that sooner rather than later, they'll reach an agreement, they'll send it to us in the House, and we can move expeditiously to send a bill to President Biden's desk so we can get this done.
Jeffries, I'm curious if anyone in your caucus ever shouted down another member and called them a smurf and launched insults in their direction or elbowed another member. Like, would that happen, and what would you do? And are you concerned about the behavior that we've been seeing on the Republican side when there are so many big issues that need to be addressed?
We certainly are concerned because our focus should be on solving problems for hard-working American taxpayers. We're going to continue to fight for things like lower costs and to grow the middle class, for safer communities, fight for reproductive freedom, defend democracy, build an economy that works for everyday Americans. These are the things that we should be fighting for. Republicans are fighting each other, literally. Yesterday was another episode of Republicans Gone Wild. And unfortunately, it wasn't the season finale, because we're going to continue to see it.
Congressman Jeffries, let's get back to Ukraine. Can you give us a specific timetable? Ukraine seems to be lost in the shadows right now with everything else that's going on in the world. The Middle East is in flames. The world is on fire, actually. But Ukraine is still out there, still fighting every day, losing personnel, fighting a vaunted enemy with much more in terms of population growth. They can keep sending people into the front lines, Russians, all day long, every day. But Ukraine cannot. They need us. What's the timetable for getting something done to help Ukraine?
It's an incredibly important question, and it was unfortunate that we were on the verge of providing significant support to Ukraine at the end of September, and then the rug was pulled out from under the Ukrainian people when.
So how come all these other supposedly democratic nations, how come they're not pitching in? How come they're not taking up the slack pertaining to funding and helping the Ukrainian people more? I mean, I heard a lot of talk pertaining to Canada, and I don't know, maybe Canada's done some good. And I've heard a lot of talk pertaining to Europe and England and the UK and everywhere else over there. But how come they're not stepping up in identifying what not just the Americans, not just the Jews, but Christians all over this planet are going up against? How come they haven't stood up to the plate is my $64,000 question.
When a continuing resolution was presented that cut out the bipartisan progress that had been made in the Senate, in the House. So here we are in terms of the Ukrainian people continuing to fight an important struggle. It's a struggle of democracy versus autocracy, of freedom versus, tyranny, of truth versus propaganda, of good versus evil, literally. And we want to stand on the side of the Ukrainian people because it is in America's national security interest.
And that is true. It is not only in our interest, but it's in all these countries that want to participate in a democracy of being able to vote in and out of their elections. And what these people don't realize, that they're also at stake. They're also at stake. And if we cannot become united against this evil force, then divided we fall, united we stand. And once more, I've been trying to unite the people now for 30 some odd years, and to this day, I still can't get them united. I think what a lot of people don't realize is that there's a difference in strengths pertaining to physical strength versus mental strength versus spiritual strength versus emotional strength versus medical strength versus political strength versus supernatural strength. And the fact of the matter is, the Christians around here that now know that it was authentic pertaining to biblical Bible prophecy that has been prophesied of the occurrences that has happened to the founder of the Windmill Ministries missions here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. It's not a matter of them failing in their faith either with or partnering up for the Windmill Ministries. It's themselves having the faith in their own God, in their own salvation, of being able to turn it around. And I don't know if they're just whipped, or I don't know, maybe they was bogus and phonies to begin with, and now the real deal is coming out towards the Christian society that are basically being whipped on and brutalized and ravaged again and again and again, just like the movie The Gladiator, whenever he was talking to Russell Crowe and telling Russell Crowe how his boy squealed and cried like a girl, and how that his wife mourned like a whore every time the guards would ravage her again and again and again before actually putting her to death. If we as a Christian society, regardless whether you think that you're a leader, regardless whether you think that you're just a convert, regardless whether you think that you're just a choir boy or whatever, if we do not have enough umption to stand up against evil and what could actually harm us and hurt us, then really and truly we have no one to blame other than ourselves pertaining to what's around the corner. It's kind of like the Afghanistan people over there. They have no one to blame other than themselves because the adults over there would not stand up against the Taliban that within, after we left 11 days later, they took back over the country. They took back over the country. Now, is that what America wants to do? Is that what Europe wants to do? Is that what Canada wants to do? Is that what all these other diplomatic, supposedly Christian societies wants to do? Or do they want a dictator, a Hitler, somebody over them and in their affairs to the degree that if you so much as even look at them the wrong way or speak out against them, next thing you know, off with your head. Off with your head. Not just a penalty towards being fined, but actually off with your head.
The challenge that we have is that there is a loud and growing pro-Putin caucus in the House Republican Conference. And it is led by people like Jim Jordan and Marjorie Taylor Greene on the inside and Donald Trump and Tucker Carlson on the outside, who are on the side of Vladimir Putin, not on the side of America's national security interests. And that's very challenging. That's why it's important for the Senate to act in a bipartisan way sooner rather than later, send us a bill, and then I think the votes will exist in the House to get it done.
Leader Jeffries, I just want to ask you about the elections that we saw, the off-year elections last week, and the motivating force that abortion still seems to be. I know that Republicans, and particularly the Trump campaign, are planning to position themselves as the kind of 15-week national ban, which they say they feel a lot of Americans would sign up to. How would you counter that message, and how do you carry on making abortion a driving force to get people to the polls next November?
Well, our view on this issue is simple. Democrats support a woman's freedom to make her own reproductive health care decisions, and that's a clear contrast with the ideological view of the individuals on the other side of the aisle who want to criminalize abortion care. They want to impose a nationwide ban. They basically want to force government-mandated pregnancies on the women of America. That's the contrast. And I believe the reason why we are seeing such success electorally in places like Ohio or Kentucky, Pennsylvania, certainly in Virginia, is because the American people understand that dynamic. And no one is buying that Republicans are trying to moderate their position on this issue. Their goal is simple, a nationwide abortion ban, and we're going to do everything possible to stop it.
Congressman, you spoke yesterday at that D.C. March for Israel, where more than 100,000 people turned out and showed up support, and not just for Israel, but for Jews around the world and in America. You led the crowd in a chant of never again. You've been unequivocal in saying that we have to do everything as a nation to support Israel. You've condemned anti-Semitic hate on college campuses. You've been very strong in your support of Israel and American Jews since October the 7th. So what do you say to some of your Democratic colleagues who are saying the opposite, things like from the river to the sea, or saying that Joe Biden is responsible for genocide? These are Democratic members of Congress. What's your response to them?
Well, I've made clear that I believe from the river to the sea is a dangerous chant. Because effectively, as has been echoed by Hamas, it is calling for the destruction of the state of Israel. And we're going to continue to support our close friend and ally. We have a special relationship between the United States and Israel. We have shared democratic values and shared strategic interests. But I think it's also important to make the moral case for Israel, which is the reality that for thousands of years, Jews have been ejected from country after country, subject to pain and persecution and pogroms, anti-Semitic hatred, of course, the Holocaust and the horrors of that crime against humanity. And I think we should all find it in our hearts to be able to make the case that in this world, there can be one country the size of New Jersey as a Jewish and democratic state and as a safe haven for the Jewish people. And we want to get to a just and lasting peace where Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side in safety and security and prosperity, dignity for the Palestinian people, dignity and safety and security and prosperity for the Israeli people, dignity for everyone.
Some of your colleagues on the Democratic side also are calling for a ceasefire in Israel. What's your reaction to that? Do you think that's a good idea?
I think that the three things that need to happen are: one, Israel has to be able to decisively defeat Hamas, this brutal terrorist organization. You can't have a ceasefire if there's no legitimate negotiating partner on the other side of the conflict. And Hamas is not a legitimate negotiating partner. So they have to be decisively defeated for the good of Israel, for the good of the Palestinian people in Gaza and throughout the region, for the good of the free world. We also have to make sure that we do everything possible to bring the hostages home safely. Third, we have to surge humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian civilians who are in harm's way through no fault of their own as a result of the fog of war.
House Minority Leader, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries of New York, covering a lot of ground for us this morning. Leader Jeffries, thanks for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Still ahead, President Biden responds to former President Trump's use of the term vermin to describe his political rivals. That's ahead when Morning Joe comes back in 2 minutes.
Let's go back, please. Let's go back. Go back. Anti-Semitism has been on the rise, and because of what went on right here at 291 Thompson Road and 430 Beech Grove Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, is an example of that costed me my brother's life in a community or a neighborhood that rose up against my brother's
You'll see.
Rose up against my brother's life because his brother decided to come back to the area that rightfully was just as much his as it was mine. But because of the seeds of division and because of the non-support coming from the churches, regardless whether it was the non-support coming from the church communities because of not being educated properly, or because of them trying to deliberately stop biblical Bible prophecy, whatever case it may be, the fact of the matter is the seeds had been planted in this area of a movement that if I come back here, they was going to make my life miserable, and boy, did they ever. Not only did they make my life miserable, but they made my brother's life miserable to the degree that he couldn't withstand the pressures that was going on.
Sure.
And the courts basically allowed for that to occur, that either they was in behind it or they inadequately done their jobs towards stopping it. Either or, regardless whether it was dereliction of duty or regardless whether it was some sort of a inner conscientious objective against Juby, that even Tommy Moore kept telling me in his courtroom that, well, everybody thinks you're the black horse. Everybody thinks you're the black horse. Well, what would have put that seed in people's hearts and in people's minds? You know, they talk about one of the factors in regards towards Biden fixing to meet with the leader over in China towards trying to reestablish their relationship. And one of the main things with any relationship is trust. And obviously, the people in this area did not trust the things that I was telling them about. That has now led us down this endless road of doom and gloom that even to this day, they're either still not willing to admit it, or because of pride, they're still not willing to move upon it. The Bible says that pride cometh before a fall. And if we cannot trust one another's insight towards who we are and what our motives are, especially whenever you take all the dots and put them together and you still don't get a movement, that tells me that I'm dealing with a doomed society, especially the church society. And it's not just the church society over here in the Western world. It's not just the church society over in the Holy Land, but it's the church society all over the world. I mean, even the Uyghurs or Wickers or something like that over there in China right now, they're in concentration camps, being imprisoned. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I may be wrong about this, but they support Muslim religion. And the fact of the matter is, regardless whether you're Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jew, Gentile, whatever, people should have the right to be able to worship and believe what they believe. Especially whenever it comes to dictators wanting to come in and ruin their lives because of the way that they believe. And that's exactly what some of these cruel, indifferent, well, that's exactly what the problem is over in the Middle East right now, towards seeing that uprising happening, is that they don't want to just live with the Jew, but they want to kill the Jew. They want to kill the Christian. Well, what does the Bible say about that? It says, let both grow together until time of harvest. We're not at the harvest time yet. If we was at the harvest time, that would be different. But we're not at the harvest time. Part of the harvest time will be of the opening of the second seal, the red horse, whenever people will be given the opportunity of either killing or being killed during this time, that the world will think that they're purging the bad people out, and the whole time we're not the bad people, but they're the bad people. But now try to convince them of that, and good luck in that. Good luck in that.
Speaker McCarthy and the reason why he was ousted. At the end of the day, though, Republicans are only going to have a 4.
I don't want to hear none of this. This is all a bunch of BS going on up there in the White House right now, because they know they've made a mess out of things and they're no longer conducting the affairs of the American people. They're no longer being adequate and sufficient with the American people.
The people gathered yesterday on the National Mall in Washington to show their support for Israel amid a
What did she say? Back it up just a little bit. Right there, Hope.
in the hallways. The Washington Post, Jackie Alamany, thank you very much for coming on this morning. Tens of thousands of people gathered yesterday on the National Mall in Washington to show their support for Israel amid a rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim rhetoric worldwide. Organizers say yesterday's demonstration was meant to underscore the right of Jewish communities around the world to be able to live free from hate. It comes as hundreds of hostages are still believed to be inside Gaza, held by Hamas as the war between the terrorist group and IDF forces grinds through its 6th week. The rally featured speakers from both sides of the political aisle, as well as family members of hostages taken on October 7th, including Rachel Goldberg, who we spoke with on Morning Joe yesterday. Her 23-year-old son, Hirsch, is among those missing.
Right now, how we are living is hard to describe to you. We hostage families have lived the last 39 days in slow motion torment. What the world needs to start thinking about today is, what will your excuse be? Bring them home. home now. Bring them home.
Joining us now, the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt. Jonathan, it's good to have you on this morning. The march was important yesterday, but will it send a message to different pockets of even this country where the hatred seems to be just cropping up worse than we could have ever imagined?
Well, Mika, I think it's a good question, and I'm glad we're talking about the march that took place yesterday. But the one thing I would say is it wasn't tens of thousands, Mika. It was hundreds of thousands of people on the mall. I heard upwards of 300,000. And we should note, these were Jews and non-Jews. These were Republicans and Democrats. I saw people with MAGA hats and people with pride flags. I mean, where else in America today could you see something like that? And by the way, you saw Israeli flags and American flags. They sang the national anthem and the Hatikva. I mean, again, it was not just pro-Israel, it was pro-America. And I just contrast this with the images I've seen, the video I've seen of people wearing masks and tearing down American flags in New York City. Right? So this was energizing and inspiring, and I think it was a message that the Jewish community is united on this issue, that the vast majority of us stand with Israel and stand against anti-Semitism, that America is more united on this issue than you might think. I mean, again, there were so many people there who weren't Jewish. It was good for Congress to see that, and it's good for the country to see that kind of unity on this important issue.
Jonathan, good morning. Thanks for being with us again. We should say Rachel Goldberg, who we saw there, she was on our show yesterday. What an extraordinary voice. She has been through this as her son, her 23-year-old son, is held inside of Gaza. You mentioned it. It wasn't just Jewish people out there. When you have a couple 100,000, I think it was an important message probably to the country and the world that actually the numbers are big, that most 99.9% of decent people with a shred of humanity are not tearing down posters of children who've been kidnapped. Were you heartened by what you saw yesterday, and how do you carry that forward to continue to fight anti-Semitism?
Well, look, that's a great question. I mean, I was incredibly heartened. I mean, there's been so much darkness, and you talked about Rachel and the Goldberg Poland family, so much darkness. I think about these babies as young as 9 months, and the 3-year-old children, and the elderly and disabled held, bound, and gagged in tunnels. It is indefensible to think that on college campuses they're tearing down these posters, and to think that in public places they're chanting "River to the Sea." And yet, I am so energized by yesterday. It was amazing, the kind of show of unity, again, you so rarely see. And again, no one's wearing masks. Everyone is holding hands. No one was arrested. It was peaceful and joyous, despite the danger of this moment. So how do we carry it forward? Look, I tell you what, number one, we're going to keep thanking the Biden administration for what they've done and push them to continue to stand with the American people and to stand with the people of Israel. I think number two, same for Congress. Get that bill passed so Israel gets the aid that it needs. And I'm testifying where House Ways and Means today about what to do about the tsunami of anti-Semitism on our college campuses. And then, again, push university administrators to finally find their backbone, Willie. Who can imagine a world in which they sit by while their students are denigrated and insulted and threatened? Now, there have been some good news. George Washington University just suspended one of the worst actors, a group called Students for Justice in Palestine. Columbia suspended them as well. Brandeis suspended them as well. And it should be clear, this isn't about abrogating freedom of speech. The freedom of expression isn't the right to freedom to incite violence. And if you do that, there should be consequences. I'm glad some university presidents are finally getting the message.
And I want to say also that they approached me here in Weakley County in 2005 towards reprimanding me of trying to put me in a category of being a homegrown terrorist towards falsifying files. But the thing about it is, I was not in a hospital or a school that pulled down a fire alarm, and I for darn sure wasn't in some sort of a theater crying fire, 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 and there was no fire, to be able to even come up with a charge in charging me for that. simply because of me passing out Bible literature. So Damien, Mr. Dempsey, that was my attorney at the time. I guess I was trying to put him in the same category as Damien. He never should had told me to agree with that charge of all time dismissed and I can go home and pleading guilty to that charge. But that started something in my life in 2005 that led into what happened in my life in 2007 up in Kentucky, up around Livingston, Benton, Kentucky, Grand Rivers, Kentucky. That also led to another ordeal that happened in my life in 2009 out in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. It was snowballing. It was getting bigger. And I guess the people up in Kentucky, certain people in Kentucky that was associated with Land Between the Lakes, decided that they was going to do an unlawful act by going after me over 2 non-threatening telephone calls, and then got the judge in Trigg County to agree to that charge. Anti-Semitism. Because
just
I
through
was
the end
a
of the
part.
semester in the case.
I was a part of something that occurred during Ronald Reagan's administration, beginning at the White House in 1988, that has now led us down this endless road of where we are today. Now you see how important it is for a government or a body of people to do the right thing rather than think that they're going to be able to underhand or undermine either God or God's people. We're paying the consequences on account of that right now, being $33 trillion in debt, all this fentanyl coming over here and all the gun violence. We're paying for that right now. Innocent lives are paying for that right now because of the bad decisions that was made, the mistakes that was made.
We're now exploring. And let me tell you, the university presidents, they might not listen to some students, but when they run the risk of losing hundreds of millions of dollars in federal grants, they're going to respond. 150 cases in a week. We're going to continue to hold their feet to the fire. And by the way, not just us, we shouldn't just wait for us to push for these cases. The Department of Education can be proactive about this and launch investigations. And other authorities like the IRS and even the FBI should look at the parent organizations to see, are they providing material support for terror? That isn't okay under any circumstances.
On any circumstances.
Jonathan, good morning. It's Richard Haas here. First of all, thank you for your consistent voice over the last 40 days on these issues about anti-Semitism, about the what college and university administrators aren't doing. I want to talk to you about another sentence, though, you used where you talked about people standing up in support for Israel. What do you advise young people? For example, if you were to meet with the hundreds of people working around the administration or on Congress who are signing these open letters calling for an immediate ceasefire, they're not. Most of them, I would think, are not anti-Semites. So what do you say? How do you distinguish between Israel's right to its right of self-defense, but people who disagree with how that right is being carried out, either some of the attacks or the lack of a political strategy for meeting legitimate Palestinian political aspirations? How do you go about parsing that? What do you tell people who are looking for answers here?
I mean, Richard, I think this is really the question of the day. So what I would say to these young people, I served in 2 presidential administrations. And the way that I got it done, even when I didn't agree, is I made my case known internally, fought strongly, ferociously inside the process. And then we always had this idea of disagree and commit. But for these young people who can't seem to abide by that, I would say, number one, recognize the humanity of the other side. If you're going to call for a ceasefire, I can't understand how you don't talk about the plight of the hostages or the 1,200 Israelis who were brutalized, raped, and murdered. So number one, start by recognizing the other side. Number two, I would say, Richard, use an outstretched hand. Talk about the fact that Palestinians have suffered and Israelis have suffered. It's the one-sidedness, Richard, that I don't understand. As someone who says the loss of any Palestinian life, human life, is a tragedy, why is it so hard for some of these protesters? And I'm not saying they're anti-Semites, but I am saying they're hard of heart by not recognizing what the Poland family is going through, by not recognizing what thousands of families are going through right now. There is a way to say, I believe in Palestinian dignity, but I also believe in Israeli humanity. These things should not be, divergent. They need to be convergent if we hope to finally have peace in that region.
So, Jonathan, we've seen a shift in the way that the administration has been speaking about what's happening in Gaza recently. A kind of more emotion, I guess, more empathy for Gaza children, for example. When Tony Blinken went to the Middle East and he said, he saw the faces of his own children when he saw the children in Gaza being killed. Do you think that's actually helpful in some way in kind of redressing some of the feeling that young people that I've spoken to in this country have said to me that, the administration doesn't put as much value on Palestinian lives, and that's what's making them feel angry about what Israel is doing?
Well, I think it's quite a reductive view to say the administration doesn't feel for Palestinian lives when this administration again and again and again has championed the notion of Palestinian dignity and equality and talked about the need for a two-state solution. But we will never have Palestinian dignity and equality if Israelis don't also have safety and security. And I think what President Biden has gotten right, what Secretary Blinken has gotten right, and what these activists get wrong is they don't recognize that, again, these must be convergent propositions, not divergent ones. And so, look, like I said a moment ago, the death of any Palestinian child is a tragedy. But the tragedy here, let's try to get causal and understand where does it come from. To think that Hamas is hiding their weapons and their fighters in hospitals and schools and homes. I mean, the level of cowardice of this organization that literally sends its terrorists into kibbutzim to butcher families whole cloth, then retreats to hide behind the sick and the wounded. I mean, the biggest sickness here is Hamas. So look, I want nothing more than Israelis and Palestinians live together in peace. But it will only come, and thank God Joe Biden has been clear about this, if both sides recognize their common humanity, and if we finally dismantle this terror organization, Hamas. I mean, look, Kitty, as what they say, Hamas spokespeople are on the record as saying they want to repeat October 7th again and again and again. I don't think it leaves Israel, and I don't think it leaves the West with much of a choice. Like, we didn't have a choice with ISIS. We couldn't let them continue to rape and pillage and murder in Syria.
Right.
We didn't have much of a choice with Al-Qaeda. We don't have much of a choice with Hamas.
CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt. Great conversation. Thank you for coming on this morning, and we will see you again soon. And still ahead on Morning Joe, an update on the Israeli raid of Gaza's largest hospital. The Biden administration says Hamas has used the facility to run its military operations and possibly store weapons. And Republican Congressman Mike Lawler of New York is our guest. We'll talk to him about this recent trip to Israel and much more. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
Once more, it's the leadership, especially the spiritual leadership, coming from the righteous supernatural side. And I realize whenever I talk about a great deal of these things that either has occurred in my life or is predicted to occur, not only in my life but in all of our lives, I realize to the non-believer or to the person with very, very shallow faith, they're gonna turn me off real quick because it's too severe, and they really and truly don't believe the way that they claim that they believe. Because if they did, I feel like that there would have already been a support team or a congregation established in the name of the Windmill Ministries missions here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. Proof is in the pudding. They either didn't believe me, or they thought that I had the wrong motives, or I'd actually been accused of trying to usher in the millennium. It ain't I. Take I completely out of this equation. That's the difference in somebody that decides one day, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to be a minister. I think I'm going to be a clergyman. I think I'm going to be a priest. I think I'm going to do this. I think I'm going to be a nun. It's a good, clean life, and it gets me out of the way towards all the other grease monkeys and hammering on stuff and working in a factory and doing this and doing that. I think this is what I want to do. Well, if you want to do it bad enough, you can become a rocket scientist. If you want to do it bad enough, you can become a Johnny Cochran. If you want to do it bad enough, you can become a president. Okay? If that's what you want to do. But it's one thing in doing what you want to do, and it's another thing doing what you have been called to do. We have ministers all over America that truly believes that they have been called of God, as well as women, called of God to be in the positions that they are in right now. We have sent more missionaries, preachers, money, humanitarian aid in the Middle East than I guess we have in any other foreign land. Going all the way back, probably beginning at before World War I. Because people have read the Bible, they understand prophecy, they identify what's supposed to happen pertaining to the river Euphrates and the blood being as deep as a horse's bridle, and et cetera, et cetera. And in actuality, it's not that we're trying to prevent from it happening, but prepare for it going to happen. And the group of people that stood up yesterday in Washington, D.C., I truly believe that there's probably just as many people that has the same incentives as myself that are trying to properly prepare people of the event, because it's not yet time for the meek to be taken out of the planet. Now, the ungodly, they want to flash all kinds of stuff in front of us, from nudity, from perversion, from being cheaters, from being murderers, from being all kinds of other stuff. And our judicial system basically proves that. Proof is in the pudding because of that. Once more, you do not have to teach a child how to lie. You do not have to teach a child how to be greedy. You do not have to teach a child how to basically be in the... let's listen to this for a second.
I don't want to get into detail.
What's your message for the families?
Hang in there, we're coming.
Wow, that's President Biden answering questions yesterday on the hostage negotiations in Gaza. Qatar is helping broker a deal to release about 80 women and children. In return, Israel would agree to at least a 3-day ceasefire, as well as the release of Palestinian women and teenagers who are being held in Israeli prisons.
Do you really think that they're going to do that? That's their ace in the hole. They're not going to let go of those hostages because they know that's the only thing that's going to basically stop an all-out assault. That's just it. The enemy wants to hide in behind the coattail of women and children. And because of it, in a situation like this is the reason why I say this, a situation like this, the best that you can hope for, if that was my child, if that was my granddaughter, if that was my grandson taken up by a hostage situation, the best that I could hope at that point in time is that they would not suffer tremendously, that their death would be quick and clean. And I know that sounds harsh. I know that sounds cruel in one way, but it's the same situation that basically I had to face off on whenever I was 14 years old. Whenever my brother got killed on an assignment towards coming after me, going to take me to Dresden towards getting a bunch of 4-H chickens, I had to make the decision, do I want to see my brother down in Memphis, Tennessee, be hooked up to a machine, being a vegetable the rest of his life towards suffering, and the whole family suffering, or am I willing to let him go? And you can call it a mercy killing if you want to, but basically, we, a whole family, as a unit, made that decision that we was not going to let him live on a machine, because that is something that we did not believe that he would have wanted. I don't want to be hooked up on a machine. If the quality of life is to the effect that I have to depend upon somebody else and burdening them because of me, let me go. Let me die my death that I need to die. That way I can get on and go to the next level of maturity of doing things that God wants me to do. The best that people can hope for in a horrible, horrible situation like this is that their loved one's death will not be long and cruel. Will not be long and cruel. But until good exceeds over bad, until the light proves to the darkness that we don't have to take it, we don't have to no longer explain our existences up onto the planet Earth. And even though you may complain, even though you may not support us, even though you may raise hell about us, we don't care. The fact of the matter is, the wheat is supposed to remain with the tares, or the sheep with the goats, until time of harvest. And it's not the devil's people that makes these decisions. It's God. It's God that makes these decisions pertaining to when it is appropriate to allow for the wheat to be removed or the sheep to be removed from the goats. That's God's call. That ain't the demon's call. That ain't Lucifer's call. That ain't the satanic call. And as long as we allow for these things to continue to ravage us again and again and again, we're going to continue to suffer again and again and again. Like I said, the suffering was so intense with my brother, I will always believe, I will take this to my grave, that the courts and the adult society in this area failed the Jackson family. And not only did we fall through the cracks of the legal system here, but we actually got attacked. Terrorized, anti-Semitism that was based around the seeds that I had already planted in the late 80s, throughout the 90s, throughout the after 9/11, 2005, getting caught up in the courts here in Weakley County and being charged with falsifying files. Proof is in the pudding. And I don't care what attorney, I don't care what judge, I don't care what prosecuting attorney, I don't care what counselor, I don't care what probation officer, you cannot deny the facts. And the facts pertaining to those things that have surrounded my family's life are undeniable. Just like the facts right now of the Jewish people being attacked, not just today, not just within the past 40 days, not within the past month, but again and again and again. The Christian society has been victimized since the beginning of time. The Garden of Eden. Why was it so alarming whenever Eve first seen the snake crawling in the garden? Most gardens are going to have a snake or two in it. May not be nothing more than a chicken snake or some other kind of snake that's basically harmless. So why would she have been alarmed if there was a snake in the garden? She wouldn't have had. So what a perfect disguise for Lucifer to say, you know what, I can get in there. And I'm going to get in there. And I'm going to disguise myself as something that will not be alarming to Adam and Eve. And once I get in there, then I'm going to start working. I'm going to start being like that small little fox. And I'm going to start working in those tight, nitty-gritty areas to the degree that I basically chew on this vine and chew on that vine and chew on this vine. And eventually, if I take enough punches at it, I can contaminate the whole vineyard. What did the snake go after? The snake went after the weaker source. Why did the snake go after the weaker source? Because the snake knew that if it could convince Eve in giving in to its deceiving effects, then Eve would work on man, and man had a weakness for woman that basically gave in, and they both are guilty of giving in to the ways of the serpent in the Garden of Eden. You got to be willing to put all the dots together and not just part of the dots together whenever you're looking at the whole truth and not just bits and pieces of the truth. Because of time, I'm going to let this go of where it is right now in saying what I've already done said. We want to pray for the people that's going through what they're going through over in the Middle East. We want to pray for the Ukrainians. We want to pray for those in Africa. We want to pray for those in South America and in all other parts of the world. We want to pray for God's chosen people to have mercy. But at the same time, we want to pray for them to have a backbone to be able to stand up against these atrocities that are happening. Not just overseas, but right here in the Western world. And I think my testimony pertaining to my brother's death can help to verify that again and again and again. The way that we was attacked again and again and again for 3 consecutive solid years before finally my brother's death. And of course the plot had already been planned of what that they was going to do with me, because they had already heard of a charge up in Kentucky, even though they didn't know nothing about the particulars. And to be quite honest with you, most law people, most judges, most attorneys, most prosecuting attorneys, most probation officers, they don't care about your story. They don't care about the particulars. Matter of fact, they don't even really want to even put a face with that story. We're just considered basically a statistic. Another one bites the dust. Another one bites the dust. And that's how they look at it. We are statistics to them. We're not real people to them. And if I did not have the pleasure of being able to use social media platform to be able to get my message out there, which no doubt social media platform needs to have some restrictions on it. But if I did not have that opportunity of doing this, I guarantee you nobody, not only within this region that absolutely didn't care about my story or about the facts, but nobody else would have known of it neither. And that's the reason why I am so adamant in thanking Facebook, YouTube, and social media, because it gives me my opportunity of putting my story out there, and then the people can make their own decisions of whether or not I was railroaded, whether or not I was done wrong, whether or not my brother was done wrong, whether or not my family was done wrong, going all the way back to the tides of whenever my great-grandfather actually worked for the state of Tennessee temporarily, not just counting the fact that he was a merchant and his wife was a midwife in helping establish this community down here, but my family actually has law enforcement in it. Not only then, but even now. I got a cousin that works for the Tennessee Bureau that lives in Union City. That's part of my great-grandfather's descendants. And that's one of the reasons why that my brother David took all this so harshly, because we did have already an established profile. And our profile wasn't just established towards our great-grandfather being a carpenter or being a this or being a that, which there's nothing wrong with that, but our profile actually profiled in with law enforcement that my brother David just could not believe, first of all, that his peers would have turned on him the way that they did because of his brother, myself, me, moving back here in 2014, but he just could not fathom how come the courts would not support us and back us and allowed for this to fester and grow and fester and grow to the point of his very own death. Good luck to all of us pertaining to this anti-Semitism. We want to pray for one another. The Bible is very clear that in this day that it is more essential than ever to pray for one another and be there for one another. It says to forsake the assemblies of thyself together, even so much as you shall tangibly see the days approaching. You're going to be able to see the days approaching, according to the Bible, of the actual end time events. Because the Bible says that as you shall see the days approaching, forsake not the assemblies of thyself together. And it's talking to the Christians, first of all, the believers, and second of all, it ain't telling the believers to associate themselves with the non-believers or the evil people or the agnostic or the atheist people, but believers need to stick with believers. The Christians need to stick with Christians. The Jews need to stick with the Jews. But we're all of the same family, spiritually speaking. That's where our leadership in America, especially, has failed us for the past 30 plus years. I want to say good luck to all of us. God bless our troops. God bless America. God bless our endeavors and where the Christian society goes from this moment on. I hope that this has been an eye-opener, even for people like Putin, even for people pertaining to the leadership of China and other authoritarian regimes out there that wants to basically rule their people in such of an evil, demonic way. Because it is basically against evil versus good, good versus evil. Now, you can paint it up any way you want to. You can call it democracy. You can call it autocracy. You can call it this. You can call it communism. You can call it statehood. You can call it whatever you want to call it. But it basically all boils down to bad versus good, light versus darkness, darkness versus light, etc., etc. It goes right back down to the very basics. You got to start out at the original core. Got to go back to where it all began. And that's what's motivating people to this day. So hopefully the things that are happening, especially on a advertising type scale, that it will be to the benefit towards the meek, truly inheriting the earth, that I'm going to continue to believe are going to happen, regardless whether it happens in my lifetime or my grandchildren's lifetime or their children's lifetime. I'm going to continue that good is going to exceed and excel over bad. I'm going to continue to believe that the meek are going to inherit the earth. I'm going to continue to believe the covenant coming out of the Bible that God has promised us, and the Lord Jesus Christ has promised us that he would not forsake us or leave us even until the very ends of the earth. The end of the world. He said that he would not abandon us or forsake us. I'm going to continue to believe that and pray upon that and teach that until the end of my days. Good luck to all of us, and God bless and heaven help us all, and shalom.